continued to ripple outward from that time. And so, I mean, and then these three shows take place within that historical period. So it's sort of a hard question, but you know, where do you think we are today now, 20 years after 89?
Well, I think that the Sydney show, what was underwriting that, and the position that it was taking was that just as you had 89, was obviously momentous in terms of a view of communism in Europe, at least. And the Chinese story developed rather differently. So 2008, 2009 was a kind of opposite number to that. If socialism crashed, so did capitalism very nearly. And it's not so much about it as a system. It's about how people look at it and how you trust it. And it's all right being said, well, it's the only system there is. It's the only one, maybe it's the only one we thought of, or they just think of the vested interest in that system as well. And what I like about the possibility of art is that you can think outside that box. You think not about only what is possible, but actually what makes people happy. And is it possible to make people happy, or can only a relatively small population of this planet be happy, and the rest will be living on the back of the unhappy? And that is an effect that media have had, the proliferation of media, at least over the past 30 years and 40 years, whereby now, I guess particularly dramatically since the Gulf War, when you can sit on the back of a bomb as it goes into a city, but now no one can say that you didn't know something was happening. You don't suddenly go, whoops, 6 million Jews, I didn't know. You'll know about it right away. You might not be told why, what the reasons are, or given the right reasons for, but you'll know it's happened. And that, I think, is a very different world that we live in. And it puts responsibility, individual responsibility, I think, to the fore. And, you know, it's up to us all to invent systems that, firstly, enable us to continue. And then when we say us, who do we need? Do we need people in Vancouver, Canadians, North Americans, people in developed countries, or all of us? And to me, I mean, there's only one answer to that, is that it has to be everyone. And we have to learn to be able to regulate ourselves. So I think, for me anyway, 2008, 2009 was a kind of reality check. And rather like 89 was.
Thank you, David. I have a question too, back to 1989. If I'm not mistaken, I could be, that was also the year of the show in Paris, The Magicians of the Earth, which I think has now been canonized as the inauguration of a new kind of internationalism. I don't know whether it deserves that credit or not. Maybe you can comment on that. But in that regard, and from the observations you have of your practice, you must be aware that there's a conversation about the role of contemporary art internationally now after what's happened in the last 30 years and how international it is. And I guess the discussion is, well, is this a force of liberation and enlightenment, as we in the art world like to think and congratulate ourselves for, or is it possible that it is yet another form of colonization?
Yeah.
And these are discussions you
Yeah, well, I think it's an absolutely
so
legitimate question.
Comment on that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, one of the criticisms of Museet de la Terre at the time and since, and I have to say it was one of mine, was it was a very exoticizing and romantic, particularly in the French tradition, a way that, you know, everyone's magician, you know. Just as the kind of beginning of the 80s, there was the new spirit in painting, so, you know, everyone's got to have spirit, you've got to have Geist, you know. And it sort of becomes a kind of fashion, which, in which nothing has changed. And, you know, it's always the problem that when you've had 250 years of supremacy of one particular way of looking at the world, and a kind of intellectual discipline and tradition which has grown up on that, there's a lot of people who really do believe they control it. And then it's been exported to the rest of the world as well. So that you get it thrown back at you from people who perhaps ought not to be talking in that way, they ought to be talking in other ways. I mean, and that is part of the struggle against colonization at many different levels. But I do think that it's possible to get away from this exoticizing thing of it being, having to label things. Now it's magicians, now it's this, now it's that. It's contemporary art. It's all contemporary art. And the only thing that matters is, should we bother about it? Is it necessary? Does it give pleasure? And that's the question I ask myself quite regularly about things now. I feel about things, and if I'm feeling, you know, but if I actually did feel it wasn't work, I would do something else. So, and I think that's what curators have to do. So that means creating an equal playing field, and doing a bit of work cross-culturally. But you aren't born, I wasn't born knowing anything about British modern or contemporary art. What I know, I've learnt, because I wanted to. You absorb a little bit, but certainly to do with visual art, I learned it all. And so the same with everything else. That's how babies learn language. So, you know, if one's curious and, you know, I think it's an enjoyable experience, then it's certainly possible. There's no, people say to me, how can you possibly know about other people's culture? As if you have to be born in that. It's kind of a bit racist, really. So is that helpful?
Well, thank you. But what I was also getting at was the last time I was in Japan, artists told me, and you've probably heard this yourself, contemporary art isn't Japanese. In other words, what we refer to as contemporary art, practiced all over the world by all sorts of people, is itself a European virus, if you want this. That is, in one way or another, transforming, trampling, whatever, local traditions. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the whole argument that the word for art was an invention of a Meiji restoration. But, you know, I'm doing a show of contemporary Japanese art in New York next March, and I think none of those artists are going to disagree that they're contemporary artists. Their work is rather different from the contemporaries who live in London or New York or here, I'm sure. But that's a good thing. And I think one of the gifts that the Enlightenment did give, which is still of great benefit, and I question a number of them, was this idea, this Kantian idea of art being an autonomous field, and of the art having a kind of autonomy of its own. And that was a kind of new idea, and the artist having a conscience, and the particular morality of the artist that comes out of those Kantian ideas. I mean, I know that subsequent philosophers didn't have much time for it, but I actually think it's worthwhile going back to those ideas and actually cherishing them, because they're actually what makes art important and what gives art an authority. Otherwise, if it's just all materialism, where do you end up? And I think that's a kind of reasonable thing, and I think that just as we learn about other cultures, I think other cultures perhaps get this too, that art is an autonomous field and that it's not such a bad thing.